Of the hundreds of stories I have told on this channel, the one you are about to hear today easily ranks among the top 5 most disturbing. There are no graphic images, but the events themselves carry a weight that may stay with you long after you finish listening. Viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of the strange, the dark, and the mysterious, all delivered in a story format, then you've come to the right place. That's all we do here. We post once or twice every week, so if that sounds like your thing, please capture the like button and force it to sweep the floor with a toothbrush, but don't let it rinse it afterward. Also, subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss any of our uploads. Alright, let's dive into today's story. In 1993, Ethan Rourke was 34 years old, living in the quiet town of Ashwood, Oregon. Ethan was a history teacher, admired by his students for the way he could bring the past alive with his storytelling. He had this rugged look, broad shoulders, messy hair, and a permanent shadow of stubble that made him look more like a lumberjack than an academic. That year, Ethan was attending a local book fair at the town square, searching for rare editions of old travel journals, when he noticed a woman he had never seen before. She was standing near a stall selling handmade maps, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, and something about her presence pulled his eyes toward her again and again. Her name was Lydia Crane. She was 28 years old, an artist who had recently moved to Ashwood after inheriting a small cabin from her late aunt. She had this quiet grace about her, the kind of person who seemed slightly out of step with the modern world, as if she belonged to another time. Ethan and Lydia struck up a conversation that afternoon, and it was as if they had known each other for years. Within weeks, they were inseparable. They spent their evenings walking the forest trails outside Ashwood, Lydia sketching the old trees, while Ethan told her legends of the region, tales of miners who vanished, rivers cursed by old tribes, and lights seen in the sky. By 1996, the two were married. Their wedding was small, just family and a few close friends, held in a clearing in the woods where Lydia had first taken Ethan to show him a tree she said had a soul. People in Ashwood admired them as a couple that seemed not just in love, but connected in some deeper, almost spiritual way. Years passed. Ethan and Lydia settled into their life. He continued teaching, she continued painting, and together they created a life that looked, on the surface, simple and idyllic. They didn't have children, though not for lack of trying. Lydia had suffered a miscarriage early in their marriage, and after that, she never conceived again. It was a wound they both carried quietly, but instead of growing distant, they grew closer. In 2005, after nearly a decade of marriage, Ethan inherited a modest sum of money from his father. Unlike most couples who would have used that money to buy a bigger house or travel, Ethan and Lydia made a decision that stunned their friends. They bought an abandoned roadside inn on the outskirts of Ashwood, a crumbling wooden building that hadn't hosted a guest in over 30 years. The inn had once been called the Lantern's Rest, a place where weary travelers would stop along the old highway. But the highway had been rerouted decades earlier, leaving the inn to decay in silence. Most locals considered it haunted, telling stories of screams heard from its empty rooms and lights glowing in windows long after it had been boarded up. Ethan and Lydia, however, saw potential. They dreamed of restoring the Lantern's Rest, turning it into a bed and breakfast where artists, writers, and wanderers could find peace. It was ambitious, expensive, and a little reckless, but they were determined. For 2 years, they poured every ounce of their energy into repairing the inn. They stripped rotten floorboards, replaced shattered windows, repainted the cracked walls. Lydia infused the rooms with her art, hanging canvases of landscapes and strange symbolic figures she said were guardians of the place. Ethan transformed the library into a cozy reading room, filling the shelves with obscure history books. By the summer of 2007, the Lantern's Rest was open for business. Guests trickled in, mostly curious travelers drawn by the inn's reputation. Some left glowing reviews, calling it one of the most peaceful places they had ever stayed. Others, however, left in the middle of the night, complaining of whispers in the walls, doors that unlocked themselves, and the sound of footsteps pacing outside their rooms. Ethan dismissed these as superstitions. "Old houses creak," he would say with a laugh. Lydia, however, seemed more troubled. She started burning sage in the hallways and leaving bowls of salt near the doors, muttering that the inn remembered too much. In October of that year, something happened that would change everything. A man named Daniel Mercer, a drifter in his 40s, checked into the inn. He paid in cash, carrying nothing but a battered duffel bag. He stayed in room 6, a small upstairs room with a view of the woods. Ethan remembered Daniel as quiet but polite. He mostly kept to himself, sitting for hours in the library, staring at the fire. On his third night, however, guests reported strange noises coming from room 6. Some said they heard chanting. Others claimed they saw Daniel standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., whispering to himself. The next morning, when Ethan went to check on him, room 6 was empty. Daniel's duffel bag was still there, but he was gone. At first, Ethan thought Daniel had simply left without notice. But that night, Lydia swore she saw him standing at the tree line, staring at the inn. When Ethan ran outside, no one was there. The following days grew stranger. Lights flickered even after the electrical system had been checked. Doors locked themselves from the inside. Guests began leaving, frightened by the atmosphere. By November, the inn was empty again, just Ethan and Lydia alone in the vast, creaking building. Then came the night of November 12th. Ethan awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At first, he thought it was Lydia, but when he reached over, she was still beside him, fast asleep. The footsteps stopped outside their door. Slowly, Ethan got up and opened it, only to find the hallway dark and empty. But as he stood there, he smelled something faint but distinct, burnt cedar, the same scent Lydia used when burning sage. Only this was sharper, acrid, almost like something smouldering. That night marked the beginning of a descent neither Ethan nor Lydia could escape. The winter of 2007 was one of the harshest Ashwood had seen in decades. Snow buried the roads, and the small town fell into a muffled silence. For Ethan and Lydia, the isolation was worse than ever. The Lantern's Rest, once filled with the occasional laughter of guests, now sat empty, just the two of them, rattling around in a house that felt too large, too cold, and far too alive. The memory of Daniel Mercer's sudden disappearance lingered like frostbite. Ethan tried to be rational. He was a drifter, he reminded Lydia. People like him vanish all the time. He probably caught a ride out of town. But Lydia wasn't convinced. She had stopped painting landscapes. Instead, her canvases filled with strange, faceless figures, tall and thin, their heads bent at impossible angles. When Ethan asked about them, she only said, "They come when the inn is restless." In December, Ethan decided to keep the inn closed to guests until spring. The financial hit would be severe, but it felt safer. He spent his days repairing broken pipes and shoveling the heavy snow from the porch. Lydia spent hers locked in her studio, painting late into the night, her brushes moving furiously across the canvas. Then, on the evening of December 19th, there was a knock at the door. Ethan opened it to find Sheriff Alan Dwyer, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and a heavy coat dusted with snow. He was holding a folder under his arm. "Evening, Ethan." "Lydia," he said, nodding politely. "I need to ask you a few questions. It's about a man named Daniel Mercer." The sheriff explained that Mercer's body had been found 50 miles north, in a frozen ravine near the Columbia River. The discovery was accidental. a hiker spotted something sticking out of the snow, which turned out to be Daniel's hand. What made the situation stranger was the condition of the body. Mercer's face was described as contorted, as if in terror, and his fingernails were broken, as though he had clawed at something before he died. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "He checked in here," he admitted. "Stayed 3 nights. Then one morning he was just gone. Left his bag behind." Sheriff Dwyer scribbled notes. "Did he say anything unusual? Mention where he was headed?" Ethan hesitated, then glanced at Lydia. She was staring at the sheriff with wide eyes, silent. "No," Ethan said finally. He kept to himself. After the sheriff left, Ethan confronted Lydia. "You saw him," he said, "out in the woods. Why didn't you tell Dwyer?" Lydia's hands trembled. "Because it wasn't him. Not anymore." Ethan didn't press her that night, but her words stayed with him. The following weeks only deepened the sense of unease. Ethan began hearing whispers when he was alone in the library, soft voices, layered over each other, speaking words he couldn't understand. At first he thought it was the wind, but then he realized the whispers stopped whenever he entered room 6. One evening, curious and uneasy, Ethan unlocked room 6 and stepped inside. The air was heavy, colder than the rest of the inn. Daniel's duffel bag was still in their corner, untouched since November. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan unzipped it. Inside, he found only one thing, a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with erratic handwriting, sketches of symbols, and passages that read more like incantations than diary entries. One page in particular caught Ethan's eye. It contained a crude drawing of the Lantern's Rest itself, surrounded by tall, faceless figures, the same ones Lydia had been painting. Beneath it were the words, "The house does not forget. It gathers. It waits." That night, Ethan brought the journal to Lydia. When she saw it, her face went pale. "I've painted them before I ever met Daniel," she whispered. "How could he know what I see?" Ethan wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, the ravings of a disturbed man. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel Mercer hadn't just stumbled into their inn by chance. In January 2008, the storms worsened. Snow piled up so high that the inn was effectively cut off from town. The isolation began to eat at Ethan. He had trouble sleeping, and when he did, he dreamed of walking down endless hallways that twisted back on themselves, doors opening to reveal nothing but darkness. Lydia, meanwhile, seemed almost consumed by the house. She spent hours sitting in the hallways, staring at the floorboards, as if listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. One night, Ethan woke to find her missing from bed. He searched the inn and finally found her in the dining room, standing in the dark, whispering. "Lydia?" he asked, his voice trembling. She turned slowly, her face pale in the moonlight. "They're underneath," she said softly. "The ones who built it never left." Ethan tried to pull her back, tried to anchor her with rational explanations, but every day the line between reality and whatever haunted the Lantern's Rest grew thinner. By February, Ethan began noticing something else. The inn seemed to change. Hallways felt longer. Doors that once opened to closets now opened to rooms he didn't recognize. Once, while carrying wood for the fire, he swore the staircase had one more step than it had the night before. It was as if the house itself were alive, and watching. Then, on February 14th, Valentine's Day, everything broke. Ethan was in the library, trying to distract himself with a history book, when he heard Lydia scream from upstairs. He dropped the book and ran, his heart pounding. He found her in room 6. The journal lay open on the bed, its pages fluttering as though caught in a wind, though the windows were shut. Lydia was standing in the corner, pointing. "There," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze. For a split second he saw it too, a figure tall and faceless, standing by the window. Then it was gone. Lydia collapsed to the floor, sobbing. "It wants us here," she said. "We can't leave. Not now." That night, Ethan made a decision. He packed their bags and told Lydia they were leaving the inn at first light. She resisted, clinging to the banister, screaming that the house would never let them go. But Ethan was determined. He loved her too much to watch her unravel. At dawn, he loaded their things into the car and started the engine. Snow crunched beneath the tires as they pulled away from the Lantern's Rest. For a moment, Ethan felt relief. They were free. But as the inn disappeared in the rearview mirror, Lydia whispered, almost inaudible, "You can drive as far as you want, Ethan. It's already inside us." Months passed after Ethan and Lydia left the Lantern's Rest. They rented a small house in another town, convincing themselves they were free. At first it seemed to work. New neighbors, new routines, a simpler life. But soon the signs returned. Objects moved on their own. At night, footsteps echoed down the hallway, though no one else lived there. And sometimes, when Ethan and Lydia locked eyes, they both felt the same suffocating sensation, that the room around them was stretching, expanding in silence, as if the house itself was growing with them inside it. The Lantern's Rest hadn't been left behind. It had moved with them. In the fall of 2008, police responded to a call at the couple's rented home. When they entered, every door and window was locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry. Ethan and Lydia were never seen again. The only thing left was a notebook on the dining table, open to a page where someone had scrawled, in trembling handwriting, "The house does not forget. It gathers. It waits." And some locals still swear that on quiet nights you can see a tall, faceless figure standing outside the abandoned inn, watching, waiting. If you've made it this far, I want to know, what would you do in Ethan and Lydia's shoes? Would you believe the visions and run away right away, or would you try to confront what was inside the inn? Leave your opinion in the comments. I read them all. And if this dark story caught your attention, don't forget to like this video, because it really helps the channel continue to bring you more stories like this. Also, share it with your friends who enjoy mysteries, and of course, subscribe so you don't miss the next cases we'll explore together. After all, the strange, the dark, and the mysterious are always closer than we imagine.